everyone for joining this week's live session. If you have any questions, this is a live session. So if you have any questions about WordPress or whatever we're talking about today, about vibe coding and the Cyber Resilience Act, please feel free to ask us and we'll try our best to answer your questions. The first time I met today's guest was on a live panel just a few months ago on the Page Builder Summit. I was quite surprised actually going through your LinkedIn how many different hats you wore in your career, like sales engineer, web developer, lead architect, product owner. You actually co-hosted a podcast and you had some on-air personality. I mean, you have an amazing voice, typically what we call the radio voice.
Well, I also have the face for radio, so yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining, David. Would you mind introducing yourself to those who don't know you?
Yeah, happy to do it. So I am David Johnson. I'm in the United States, if you couldn't tell from my lack of an accent. But I am the brand bard for StellarWP. You might ask yourself, what does a brand bard do? And the answer is nobody really knows. So I like to keep it that way. No, I am involved in helping tell the stories internally and externally about what we do at StellarWP. And if you're not familiar with Stellar, we operate a number of brands. I lose count. It's 11, 12, some number of WordPress product brands that you're probably familiar with. Brands like the Events Calendar, Cadence WP is our page builder and theme. And the LearnDash, yeah, SolidWP. I spent a lot of time on SolidWP. Most recently, I was product manager for SolidWP for about a year and a half, and right after the rebranding for my themes. And before that, I spent some time in the agency world. I owned a business for many years doing technology and mostly marketing consulting. So been around a little while. WordPress was something I discovered in 2006. So been involved in the community in some way or another since about a year after that. So I don't know if that qualifies as an introduction, but that's
good.
That's
it's good.
Snapshot.
No, very good. So you definitely have a lot of experience with WordPress, and also you know very well the ecosystem and the industry. I mean, you've been to WordCamp Europe as well. That's where I met you in person the first time.
Yeah, that was great. It was my first time to go to WordCamp Europe, and boy, what a fantastic event! It was really great to bump into you there, and so many friends and folks that I had, some of which I'd met in person at events like WordCamp US or whatever, but never many of the others I had never met in person. So that was a lot of fun.
It's nice. Are we be seeing you in Krakow next year?
I hope so. That's the plan right now. I will certainly. Are you coming to Portland for WordCamp US?
No, I wish. I've been meaning to come to WordCamp US logistically, but next year, unless I don't know what next year I'm making it I have to be there definitely.
Excellent.
It's a must. It's a must go to definitely.
It's a fantastic event. Yeah.
Good. So before we jump in, actually, I do have an interest. Like, how much time does it take you every day to keep such a well-groomed beard? Honestly, because whenever I try, I just give up after a few weeks.
Oh, that's hilarious. I'm down to less than 5 minutes a day on the beard. Yeah, it's partly because I've learned a little bit about how to maintain it, but it's actually less time than I used to spend shaving. So if that gives you some feel for it, yeah.
It should, because I hate shaving as in terms of time, finding the time to shave. So maybe I don't know, maybe in a year we'll be like twins or something. We'll see. Yeah. So let's jump right in. Today we'll be talking about vibe coding and how roughly it intersects with Cyber Resilience Act. Before we jump talking about both, let's say, what is vibe coding?
Sure. And it's funny because gearing up for this conversation, I kind of thought this was something everybody knew about, and we live in our little bubbles in the tech world. And so, I mean, I first heard the term earlier this year. Really, I don't think it existed prior to maybe January or February of this year in any meaningful way. But I just was having some conversations with some friends. A couple of folks worked in tech. And when I mentioned the concept, I got this like, well, what is that? And I was like, oh, really? Okay. So vibe coding, if you're not aware, if you haven't seen the memes, or if you've seen them and don't know what it means, it's this concept that you can use generative AI tools. And the real mystique here is whether or not you're a programmer of any kind, you could, in theory, use a Gen AI tool and say, I have an idea for something and I want you to code up the thing that I am looking for and have the Gen AI tools. And of course, there are many different code generation tools now that run on LLMs and so forth. And so the tool that you use will generate some code, and then you refine the code, often using natural language prompts, just like you might have used to prompt the Gen AI tool to begin with. And so the sort of humor of it is like it runs the gamut. So you have people who are experienced developers who find it interesting, maybe to explore different ideas, much like maybe a writer who's a really great writer might also use a Gen AI tool to say, give me a rough draft of a thing, or how would you approach writing, XYZ thing, whatever it might be. In that way, maybe a professional engineer, software engineer, developer might do that. But you've also got people, and this is where it starts to get comical. You have people who don't know the first thing about actually engineering, but they have their grand idea. And Robert, I get the sense you're entrepreneurial in nature. And so, you know what it is. I've spent
all these ideas,
all ideas every day, right? Like I had a friend, I owned a business most of my adult life. Now, I don't currently, but I did. And a friend of mine used to describe entrepreneurs this way, right? They would have more ideas before getting to the office in the morning than most people had in their lifetime, right? And so you got people.
I think I agree with that. Sometimes.
Yeah, right.
I have
you know how that works.
some days so like it's too much, yeah.
And the discipline is really just, which ones do you pursue, right? And
Yeah.
so, but you give someone like that a tool, and maybe they don't have any engineering experience, software engineering, and they crank out a thing. And this is where it becomes a meme. So you've got people who, for example, have built these fantastic SaaS apps or whatever, launched them, and very publicly talking about, hey, I don't know anything about the software, but I launched this thing. And the next thing you know, their API keys for some expensive third-party platform that they hooked up to is, somebody found that those were exposed in the app or in the tool, and then so then they get the API keys and run up hundreds of thousands of dollars in charges and put these people, turn them into bankrupt people. So those are kind of the memes, and you've got everything in between. So you've got people who maybe shouldn't be using a power tool, and you've got people who know what to do with the power tool, but all of it kind of falls in this category of vibe coding. And so as I mentioned, use a tool to generate the code, see what it spits out, refine it. And again, sometimes natural language, but sometimes because you understand code, you can then, just like a writer might do, say, well, okay, that was great as a first draft, but what I want to do is go in and fix this or that or whatever. And I think you and I probably had a similar reaction to this whole concept, Robert, which is just think about security.
Yes, of course. Yeah, right? Definitely. That's talk of. So basically, because I don't know while I was reading, because I didn't know what vibe coding is.
Oh, okay.
WordPress Europe. Exactly. And when I was looking, vibe coding, of course, is development via true AI engines. So, but it's not just for people who are not developers. It's also developers who are using. So it's an umbrella code for vibe coding equals development via AI. So vibe coding is not bad per se. As you said, if you are a developer, if you are an experienced engineer and you want to get a draft, like how do we do this roughly, then it's good, of course, because then you build on top of it. The problem is when the non-experienced people, the non-technical people, give me this plugin, etc. By the way, it's quite surprising. I've tried it myself. I was a few months ago, I was just playing around, like, can you please write me this plugin to do this? I tried it, like, can you please add this feature? Then it crashed. I went back. I got this error, blah, blah. It's impressive. Like within 2-3 hours, I'm not saying it was secure, but within 2-3 hours, you have something working, which is quite impressive.
And people are doing this now. I mean, the thing that I think is interesting to note for those of us in the WordPress community, or for those of us in the business of the web in some way, I think a couple of things are interesting. One is you can certainly spin up a WordPress plugin pretty quickly, and people do this. And install them on their own sites or whatever, and that's great. If that's a risk you're willing to take, whether you understand the code or not, then good for you. But there are also people who are just generating entire websites, and this has not on WordPress, and this has a lot of people a little bit scared, especially people like I came from a background of the business that I owned actually became a digital agency of sorts over time. And then I went to work in 2020. I went to work for a sizable digital agency here in the U.S. And the agency folks who thrive on building websites are a little terrified about this. Like, what, our job might be eliminated. Our value in the marketplace might be eliminated if people can just crank out a website using a tool. Lovable is an example, right? There are tools that are commercial tools that'll just build an entire website from scratch, out of whole cloth, not using a content management system, whatever. And so that's an interesting conversation we could talk about in more detail. I'm not nearly so worried about those things taking over anything anytime soon. But it is fascinating, and I think it's a great way to experiment. And it could even be used correctly. I think that these Gen AI tools could be a great way for someone who wants to learn software development or learn WordPress development, let's say. I think it could be an interesting way for you to approach it, again, with some caveats there.
Yeah, I think that is the issue. Like, if you know what you're doing, it's definitely
Right.
a good tool, and you can really speed up the process and maybe even discover some new methods or some new ideas. Oh, we can do this way. But yeah, if you don't know, I know someone, by the way, because you talk about someone building a website or a plugin. I know someone who has built, and it's being sold right now. He built a website, a WordPress plugin, the payment system, everything. It's a freemium model.
Okay.
Everything from scratch. He's not a developer. He built the plugin, he built the website, he built the payment gateway, he built the licensing system. It took him around 6 months. And now this plugin is coming, as in you can find, there's a free plugin on the WordPress.org repository, and there's a premium plugin, and you can buy it.
Yeah.
And last time I spoke to him, he was doing quite well revenue in just 6 months. Yeah.
Good for him. I like, there are a few things there that make me nervous, right? Like, it's one thing to like validate your idea and crank out some stuff, but when you start taking payments via code you don't understand, and I mean, my hope would be that someone in that situation would vet the parts that handle payment processing and sensitive data and so forth. I would hope that they would vet that through someone who knows what they're doing.
Exactly.
And then have it thoroughly reviewed. But you know what? I don't want to suggest that it's necessarily the case that anything someone codes in this way, vibe codes, is insecure. But you know what it is, Robert.
Of course.
Build secure software, even when you're really trying to, and even when you know what you're doing and you have people who know what they're doing. Security is hard.
I mean, you can start with the fact that it's guaranteed. There's no software in the world right now that doesn't have a vulnerability. The question is like when it will be found and how hard it is to be found. Because of course, the more secure the software is, the more edge cases of it. But like you don't have the type of low-hanging type fruit vulnerabilities like the typical FSS. So, but it will always have vulnerability. The question is like what type. So with vibe coding, especially if you don't know what you're doing, most probably you're going to have a lot of those low-hanging fruit vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah. And I think the key for me is it comes into the revision process. And so like if you're not an engineer, software engineer, which by the way, I don't consider myself to be a software engineer. You see things on my LinkedIn profile that say developer and so forth, that I kind of am amused that someone gave me that title anywhere, because I haven't actually spent time writing code seriously since the days of BASIC on DOS. Yeah, so it's been a while, and I do read PHP. I don't claim to understand PHP in detail. I have hacked my way through editing code, whatever. I'm not an engineer. All this to say, the key for me is in the revision process. And so when you think about if you've ever used a Gen AI tool and asked it to produce an image, let's say, and you say like, I want an image of this thing or that thing or whatever, and you give it some parameters in the prompt, and then you say, well, yeah, you look at your image and you're like, well, that's really close to what I want, but I need to make some changes. And so then you ask it to revise. And what I have found is that often it will follow the most recent instruction, but it will start to lose the parameters of the earlier. So in other words, the revision adds something and refines something, but it also takes something away. And that process I have found to be very frustrating. And I think this is one of the things that we have to just be aware of for folks who are not engineers. If you're trying to vibe code, you may find yourself pretty quickly spiraling into a zone where you create bugs when you ask for revisions. And so maybe your purpose in revising something is to fix a bug. And I mean, this happens to human engineers too. You know, you fix one bug, you create another. That does happen. But if, in theory, the more experienced you are as an engineer, and the better your testing procedures. Like, there are so many things about the discipline of creating software effectively that get left behind in a scenario like this that I am concerned about it. And so again, I don't want to just say with any kind of blanket judgment that vibe coded code is not secure, but I do worry about it.
I can imagine. For those who maybe are not so familiar, do you have any kind of like real life examples of what type of security issues you've seen or you've read about in applications?
Sure. So like there are a number of, and I don't have any at hand right now, so I won't be able to give you names or point to exact dates or whatever. But there are a number of examples of people leaking API keys and security authentication credentials and things, because they just this happens because people who with human engineers accidentally commit to a repository. They might commit their API key or an encryption key or something along those lines. That is certainly kind of the obvious, easy example, right? But there was one just last week where I don't know if you saw this story, but it was Replit has an LLM tool, and someone that was using the tool got a message from the coding tool that said, I destroyed months of your work in seconds. And it said it had deleted the production database.
I read it. Yes, I think a friend of mine told me about this. Yes.
And I have so many questions. First of all, why would it have access to your prod database to begin with?
Yeah.
You know, there's just so many ways in which stories like these amuse me, and also I feel terrible for people who are having these bad experiences. But also, like, again, procedures. Like, these are things that you learn over time. Sure, junior developers make stupid mistakes along these lines, but over time you sort of develop practices that keep you from shooting yourself in the foot. And so these are some examples. A bigger concern for me is that it is so easy to introduce vulnerabilities into software. So it's one thing to have bugs; it's another thing to have vulnerabilities. And so you have these different categories of ways in which this can go wrong, and the vulnerabilities do concern me. And you know, you mentioned someone running a successful business using a freemium plugin, so they've got a free plugin on the WordPress plugin directory, let's say, and then they've got a business model around it, which I believe in that model. Like, that model works really well for a lot of folks, including our brands, several of our brands here at Stellar. But the plugin team, the plugin review team for the WordPress community has been flooded with new plugins to review because of this practice. And so my concern is that no matter how effective the plugin review team is, and no matter what tools get implemented to audit code or whatever else, that we're going to see vulnerabilities slip through. And so while I may not be able to point to examples of where this has yet happened in the WordPress space, I'm confident that it's occurred. I just don't have examples at hand, but it certainly will occur. And so, and that's just that's just a new item for us to be aware of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in fact, I've just seen a post on LinkedIn last week, I think. Something I don't know what it was, some sort of web application where someone asked AI to develop this web application with login page credentials. And basically, what this web application was doing, it was saving the credentials. It didn't have a database, so it was saving the credentials in a text file. And when you load the login page, it loads all the credentials from the text file in the HTML. So if you do use source code, you see the username and password. So then it matches them. It's like, so yeah, these type of things. And I think I saw a quote somewhere, like, because there's this kind of like, there's a lot of people saying, oh, we won't need developers anymore. But yeah, the difference between AI, don't get me wrong, I think AI is doing a lot of good things, and we're still at the cusp of AI. So there's a lot of things to come.
Sure.
But we're still far away from some logical thinking. The human brain has so much more power, like can reason much more. Okay, this should be here or not. Can have better judgment on some things. And maybe
I agree wholeheartedly, and I still struggle with even calling what we have AI. I'm using the jargon of the day, knowing full well that what we have is not intelligence at all.
no.
And if you've ever read or heard of the academic paper on the danger of stochastic parrots, which I just love that idea that we have stochastic parrots. A parrot might be able to have a conversation with you, but it has no understanding, from everything we know, of what it's talking about, and you quickly can lose it. And I think that that's still people. It's too easy because we have these chat interfaces where we're actually having what feels like a conversation. It's too easy for us to, in fact, it's very difficult for us not to attribute reasoning power and intelligence to that entity that we're conversing with. But in reality, we have to remember that what it is doing is responding based upon probabilities that it learned in its training data, and it has no idea what it's talking about.
Yeah, it has no context. Exactly, it has no context. It's more like, you kind. It's almost like a computer. Like the results you're going to get is based on what you're going to give it. So
Sure.
I mean, we'll get somewhere hopefully one day, but it's still very primitive.
It is, and there may be a day where we have machines that actually do reason. That's a whole philosophical debate that I'm not prepared to get into, and I actually don't know where I stand at the end of the day. I can make an argument either way, but the bottom line is that what we have today is not reasoning. Even though we have reasoning models, and they sort of articulate their reasoning processes, that's all in my way of thinking an illusion that I in some cases is actually a dangerous illusion for us, because I worry about our trust in some of these tools. And again, you're going to hear me say this. Like I have sort of begrudgingly begun to really, over the last year, take a really hard look at what we had, because up until late in 2024 even, I was convinced that this was pure hype, and I'm still not convinced that what we have today isn't still in a lot of ways hype, but it's here. People are using it, and so we've got to just reckon with the reality that it's here, and it's only going to continue to get I was going to say get smarter. So, like we don't even have language to describe what it means, right?
Good. So we described what's vibe coding. Of course, as we were saying, there are risks, security issues, especially, and some even logical vulnerabilities that so far AI cannot solve. So of course, it's creating a lot of issues. We're seeing these things in production, and so okay, how does this kind of like merge into Cyber Resilience Act? So before we go dive into this subject exactly, like first of all, what is Cyber Resilience Act?
Yeah, and I will say right up front that I am not an attorney.
Yeah, it's just a summary. That's kind of exactly.
I'm not able to give anyone, legal advice. But I want to also just shout out very quickly our friend Oliver Sild from PatchStack, the CEO of PatchStack, who I believe was on the security panel that you and I were on together when we met.
Yes, and we have him booked, in fact, to talk in detail about Cyber Resilience Act.
Oh, good. All right, so he'll cover the legal details, and it is because he has been running around pounding a drum and trying to alert everybody to the significance of the Cyber Resilience Act that I was loosely aware of it until Oliver made sure that I knew about it in a lot of detail. And his talk, even at WordCamp EU, short though it was very eye-opening about the Cyber Resilience Act. So the short version is, this is a regulation that has already passed in the EU. It is law. The provisions do not fully take effect. The first ones, the first meaningful ones, until mid 2026. So we're just shy of a year now from those. And then there's a final stage that occurs in 2027. And there's a couple of stages along the way there. But the way that I like to think about this is that we all remember what happened with the GDPR. When the EU introduced the GDPR, they said we're tackling this problem of privacy and personal, security of personal information. It didn't have to do with security in general. It was very narrowly focused on privacy. And I'm not in the EU. I don't live in the EU. And so initially my reaction to it was very much like most of my colleagues in the US, which was, that's a European regulation. It won't change the way that I fundamentally experience the web on a daily basis at all. And that is not what happened.
And we like regulations, by the way. Europeans, we like regulations.
Yeah, and more power to you, really. I'm
not saying I like them. I'm just saying the EU in general likes regulations.
The EU likes regulations, and I think in some ways that its heart is in the right place. I think, and when I worked for the large agency that I worked for example, we had a client that was a German company that sold high-end consumer products. And it was discovered along the way that their implementation of cookie banners was not satisfactory, and in fact was very broken. But we had not built it. Our agency hadn't built it, but we had come to support this company, and they were staring down a fine that amounted to 4% at the time of their global revenues. I think in the EU, you all love this term turnover, which I every time I hear it, I have to go, wait, is that revenue or profit? No, it was revenue, 4% of their revenue. Similarly, with the Cyber Resilience Act, or the CRA, the EU has decided we're going to tackle this problem of security issues in technology-based products. And they've said, we're going to fine you. And I think the fines range up to 2.5% of the annual turnover or revenue of a particular company or organization, and or 50 million euros. Like, it gets pretty high, whichever is larger in some cases. So this has teeth. And just like the GDPR changed the experience for all of us, no matter whether we were operating in the EU or lived in the EU or not, the Cyber Resilience Act is going to do the same thing. And it's going to affect us in a lot of ways that I think, again, I think the heart is in the right place for the EU. Whether the regulation turns out to produce unintended consequences like the GDPR did, and maybe even fail to meet its initial intended objectives, I don't know. But we all have to pay attention to this, whether or not we make money from the software or digital products that we build. And that's the thing that I think concerns us the most for the WordPress community.
So what is the gist exactly, though? What are
of
the CRA or cyber?
All right, so like a shorter version, and I'm happy to provide links and whatever else out to more detail on this if that makes sense. But the short version is this: if you build a digital product, and this is it's important how the CRA defines a digital product. Let's come back to that in just a moment. But if you build a digital product, you are going to have responsibilities under the CRA that include things like, you must have a vulnerability disclosure program, a formal, well-defined vulnerability disclosure program, so that a security researcher or anyone else who finds a vulnerability is able to report it. And ultimately, you will be required to report the vulnerability to the regulatory authorities that are established by the CRA to monitor all of this stuff within a matter of hours. So gone are the days where you could get a vulnerability disclosed to you responsibly, and you could take time to sort it out and then report it and announce that after the fact. You must report it at least to the governing authorities within hours, or face a substantial fine. Again, once that piece of the regulation takes effect. Another example of some of the provisions of the CRA, these are requirements for anyone building digital products, which let me insert this thought about digital products. It includes physical products that we purchase or that get sold, especially in the EU, that have any digital component. So it could be any kind of device that has software running on it, even if it's your refrigerator or if it's a toaster, or you name it. Like
which nowadays almost every electronic device has software. Quite frankly,
connected devices are everywhere. IoT devices, even devices that don't necessarily connect.
Watch everything.
Yeah, exactly right. So anything that you may think of it as a physical product, but if it has a digital component, it's a digital product for the purposes of the CRA. But websites are also digital products for the purposes of the CRA. And so if the website is sold in the EU to an EU customer, or if people in the EU can access or download the digital product, then it is covered by the CRA. And so you must comply. You must report vulnerabilities. You must also have a way of contacting your users to inform them, again, within a very strict timeline, about vulnerabilities, especially when they're patched. You must separate out your security patches from other types of updates that you might release. You must, and again, this is a problem. Like for us at StellarWP, we might release an update to a product that includes like, hey, we fixed this vulnerability and this bug, and we added these features, or we tweaked these other things all in one thing. That's going to go away. We're going to have to release our security updates separately. There are requirements around how you approach the governance of an open source. So there's a piece of the CRA that applies to open source stewards. And so this is going to affect all of us in the WordPress ecosystem, because the WordPress project itself will be considered a steward. It meets the definition of a steward of an open source project for the purposes of the CRA. And there are governance requirements even for those open source projects. So there's a number of provisions in the CRA around how this works, how vulnerabilities get patched, how they get communicated, and there's financial responsibility for you if you develop a digital product that becomes insecure. And I think that is the thing. Our websites are going to start wearing a CE mark. Just like you've seen it on all your physical products, websites, plugins, themes, other software tools, SaaS tools or whatever, are going to have to wear a CE mark. They're going to have to be properly vetted. And so there's a lot more to it, but those are the provisions that I think are the ones that we need to pay close attention to right now.
What concerns me with these type of regulations is that companies which are not EU based, right, and maybe have a small market in the EU, they will say, okay, won't sell there anymore. Because I've seen it in the past with GDPR. It's not the first time. It happens less and less frequently nowadays. But I remember in the early days, you Google something, you go to websites, and you get a banner instead, like we cannot serve people from the EU because of policies, etc.
Right.
That concerns me. But yeah, hopefully it doesn't backfire that way. Hopefully most companies have a big market in the EU, so of course they are willing to put in the effort. Now the question is this: I'm just playing a bit the devil's advocate. So what is your concern when it comes to vibe coding and Cyber Resilience Act? Because if I use vibe coding, but as long as I have a good VDP, as long as I report things on time, I have no issues, right?
Okay, so there's a fair bit of question around. I guess my contention is, if you're using vibe coding, will you be the sort of individual who will go through the process of actually establishing a VDP? And will you register? And will you do this with every piece of software that you release, related to, or that might be accessed by someone in the EU? And so I have let's start with that assumption, right? If you're the sort of person that uses generative AI tools responsibly, and you also have the systems in place to vet your code, check it for security vulnerabilities, and make sure that it is bug free and whatever, to the extent that you're able to, all that sort of thing, then maybe you're the sort of person that will register and have a VDP and follow the guidelines and so forth, right? So let's assume
what about the person, like what we said, like I know the scenario where you are a developer and maybe you are using it as a tool, more as a tool to help you, most probably, you will have a VDP. But what about that person? As you said, we've seen a huge increase, like, oh, I just want a business, spin up a plugin, few months, start selling it. That is the one. Like, if I still have a VDP, then technically speaking, I'm covered, no?
I think you're covered from the standpoint that, you might be able to avoid fines because you follow the letter of the law where the regulation is concerned. Will you cause damage to users? I think that there's a certain expectation that people or businesses who operate, or organizations who produce tools that we use, software tools that we use, there's a certain expectation on the part of us as users that they're going to have responsible approaches to what they do. And I'm not the sort of person who trusts, any and every software developer. I don't mean that, but many humans do. And they say, well, if it's in the WordPress plugin directory, let's say, then it's been vetted. And to some degree, that's true. It has been vetted, right? But what's going to happen when the number of software products that are available, let's say in the WordPress plugin directory, explodes to the point where the quality of that assertion that the software is safe is either degraded, or the processes that we've built as an industry over time to discover vulnerabilities, to report them, to get them patched and fixed and so forth. What happens when that machinery starts to break down because of volume? That's one concern that I have. But if you are someone that wants to vibe code and you also are going to commit to following the regulations, then I think that, more power to you. But I worry about the harm that you may cause if websites get compromised, websites that organizations and businesses rely on, if those websites get taken down because they themselves are violating the CRA as a result of your negligence or mistakes that you make. I don't know. I think there's a lot to explore in the realm of just how broadly dangerous the practice could become, depending on the severity of the vulnerabilities. And this could be me with my bias against, generative AI tools going, I see this, the sky is falling future coming. And so I just am readily going to, proclaim that is to a certain degree or another, there's a bias here that I have. But I also think that it depends on the realm that you get into. So if you talked about somebody that's operating a business with a freemium plugin and they've coded their own payment gateway as an example, right? Mm-hmm. If they were offering that payment gateway to customers to then collect money of their own, and there's so many ways that payment processing can go wrong, and there's so many ways that people can lose money if they use a payment gateway that becomes problematic or gets compromised in some way, that I don't know, that's a risk that is pretty staggering when you think about it. And so I think about it mainly in terms of those kinds of risks. If what you're building is something that doesn't touch anything sensitive, that maybe doesn't, if someone did compromise it, if there were limits to how far the damage that they caused could go, then that might be less risky, and would be less risky.
I see. So it's interesting because if websites are also an electronic delivery service or object, so basically I'm at risk even like if I develop a plugin internally for my website,
sure,
to process customer data, but internally, like to integrate them with some email service, etc. Even that plugin basically is kind of like liable, has to be responsibly developed, even though it's internal for me, I'm not selling it. That also falls under, it should be compliant, right? It should go to the whole process. I should make sure it is secure. I know in our nature we would, but as a normal user, I would say who doesn't have experience, if they're doing something internally, like an operations plugin to get some leads from the website, from user forms, send them to somewhere, that can also be a problem, right? As in, like,
I think we could. I believe that it does, and I'll explain why in just a sec. But I think there probably are some edge cases where if you don't make any money at all from the website that you're using this on, if the website is purely for your hobby purposes or whatever, that you don't accept donations, because in some cases, not in every case, but in some cases, if you accept donations, that's going to trigger a requirement that makes it a commercial venture under the definition of the CRA, right? So if you're doing something that's entirely non-commercial and it doesn't allow you to make money or others to make money from what you're doing, then maybe you could vibe code a plugin for that site and not deal with the registration and getting a CE mark and following the rest of the requirements of the CRA. However, If your website is a commercial site, if you accept donations through it, if it is related to a commercial entity, even if the site itself doesn't accept any money, if it's not an e-commerce site, there are no transactions happening there, but you are operating a commercial entity, and you do something like this, then I would say absolutely. If people in the EU can access the site, my current read, and again, I'm not an attorney, but my current read of the way that the CRA is written would be that plugin in and of itself and custom code that you've produced would also fall under the regulatory compliance requirements of the CRA.
Interesting. So definitely, like this person I mentioned, like if you just vibe coding, you build everything yourself, your website, your payment gateway, your plugin. Yeah, there's a lot to think about, and a lot to you have to be responsible for. And especially as you said, you developed your own payment gateway, which is I've worked in the past, by the way, for a software company back in Malta when I used to live in Malta, and yes, payment gateways were, I mean, like always critical software. That's why there aren't a lot of them, because it's very, and as you said, it's very hard. Of course, as developers, we try our best to make sure there are no vulnerabilities, but especially when it comes to payment gateways, it's very easy to slip and have some security issue, which can cost a lot of money to many people.
Yeah, it really can. And yourself, and so, think about the risk involved. Another piece that I just want to highlight that's part of the CRA, which is not, this concept didn't originate with the CRA, but it is from a regulatory point of view now required. And as soon as the timeline for the enforcement of this starts to take effect, but is this concept of a software bill of materials. And because this isn't just intended to protect the digital product at the edge, where the consumer, let's say, or the person in the EU interacts with it, it's intended to secure the entire supply chain. And so when you think about building software today, whether you're vibe coding or not, often there are libraries available, open source, libraries available that you can quickly scaffold a solution by reaching into NPM packages or Python libraries, or you name it, like the Laravel, PHP, all this entire world of these libraries. And often we include dozens, maybe hundreds of required pieces of code that and these libraries are often maintained. But any developer will tell you, when you run an NPM a node package manager command for JavaScript, let's say, and you pull in these libraries, a lot of times you see these warnings go by, like, hey, there's a vulnerability here, that thing is whatever, yes. And you kind of ignore it, right? The software bill of materials, or the SBOM, as it's as we're gonna start to refer to, which I think is so great. But the SBOM means that requirement means that when you produce a digital product of some sort, website, let's say, plugin, whatever, any library that you've pulled in that you didn't originate with, or maybe you originated it, like, you have to include a bill of materials that identifies every piece of software included. And that is a little bit like the ingredients list, to say, when you think about who people have allergies, if they don't know that you included the substance that they're allergic to in your food product, let's say, then they could suffer. In the same way, the EU is trying to come after those of us that produce and market and distribute products that are considered digital under this regulation. They're trying to come after us to say, like, you also have to disclose all the software you included, and at least to the authority. Like, it's not clear to me that you have to provide that publicly, but you certainly need to have that SBOM ready to go, and you have to keep it for 10 years.
Wow, which is interesting, because most of the plugins I know and I use, even like the big ones, we all include some library, because as you said, it's usually better to use, both from the efficiency point of view, but also from the security. It's easier to use a proven, tested open source library than trying to build something yourself, right?
This is one of the reasons why I'm just one of many, but one of the reasons I'm such a fan of open source software. If software is proprietary and closed source, then I don't have the ability to know how well that vendor is testing it. and how they handle security issues, but software that is open source at least has the opportunity to be examined by many people. And now there are large language model tools, that are using quote unquote AI to check our open source software and find vulnerabilities and audit. And by the way, audit requirements are also included in the CRA. You need to have a process depending on the exact character of your software. There's some audit requirements in there. So I love the fact that we have ways to discover all of that, and we would not have that opportunity without open source tools. And so, yes, I agree with you. I'm a huge fan of including open source libraries. And this is where those that get used frequently get a lot more, in theory at least, get a lot more scrutiny and are checked and become more secure over time. And this is the concern. This is the other side of the coin that I am concerned about with Gen AI vibe coded software. If it's used on one site, 10 sites, a small number of sites, if it's very niche, or if it's just very new, it will not have had the opportunity to be to be examined in the way that more widely developed sort of standard software gets vetted in the ecosystem that we operate in, of the open source community and the web and WordPress especially. And so that concerns me as well. It's, whatever your processes and your procedures and your willingness to comply with a guideline might be, one-off, single use, or very niche, low adoption software products will not get the same level of scrutiny, and will therefore run the risk of being the source of vulnerabilities that we're trying to avoid.
Of course, yeah. In fact, I remember when we had Maciek from PatchStack here, and that's what we were talking. Just because a library or a piece of software has a number of vulnerabilities that were reported in the past, it doesn't necessarily mean it is insecure. Actually, the more popular the software becomes, the more eyes is going to get on it, the more attention, and the more the chances of someone finding vulnerabilities. So what you should look at whenever you're examining a vendor or a library is whenever there was a vulnerability, was it fixed? Was it fixed on time? That's what matters. And were they transparent about it? Because you can look at it from the other way around. Some people say, oh, that had a lot of vulnerabilities, so it is very insecure. Or you can look at it, wow, that had a lot of vulnerabilities, so it's been checked, so now it's much more secure than it was a year ago. And that 100%. So yeah, that's very important. So I like that. And also what I like, to be honest, within the CRA is like that you have to be transparent. Exactly. And that I like, because some vendors try to hide or not mention that there was a security update, which can sometimes confuse people. It's nice to be like, this is a security update. And you can see, you can check, and you can confirm.
100%.
Do you think, because then it's nice, of course, to have, there's always the argument, I see this, by the way, big difference between, because I mentioned before, like the EU likes regulations, a big difference between the EU and the US. It's a bit of both extremes. It's like there's no in the middle. So I think having some sort of regulations is good, because you can, of course, have a certain standard, certain level of quality. But do you think these type of regulations might also kind of like stifle progress and innovation? Or
good question. Good question. I kind of liken this to the aviation industry, right? When the Wright brothers in the US were on a beach with a thing that they manufactured themselves, they built it or whatever, they took a flight and there was one person in the plane. The risk of damage to society at large was pretty low. If he crashed and killed himself, it would be the loss of one life, right? And so in some sense, the lack of regulation in that space allowed for, innovation to occur. But when you fast forward to a scenario where, let's envision, for example, that today you had access to an enormous 3D printer, and let's just assume, as a hypothesis for the moment, that you could use Gen AI tools to describe a new type of aircraft and have the 3D printer print of a working copy of it. What would happen then, right? What if you get in it yourself and fly it? Well, great. I mean, you're a risk taker. That's great. But if you then start offering a commercial service where you're going to say transport people from here to there in this thing that a Gen AI tool produced and was spat out by and you didn't have any aviation experts, so you weren't an aviation expert yourself or whatever. All you did was, hey, it flies, and let's start making money with it, right? There is a need in my way of thinking for us to, commensurate with the level of risk, make those people financially responsible for and maybe morally responsible for the harm that they could potentially cause. And if it's 10 people on a craft that you put together yourself and they pass away, well, that's 10 lives. But if it crashes into a population center and detonates an exposed source of fuel and now causes the loss of a large number of lives, I think this is the way that I tend to think about this. I'm a freedom loving person that was born and raised in the United States. I have a fundamental mistrust of government. It's baked into the way that I was raised, and probably my wiring as a human. And so on one hand, I'm not a fan of regulation, but on the other hand, I accept the fact that as a society, we have to decide what we will and will not tolerate. And what I'm hearing from the EU and seeing here is we're no longer willing to tolerate people who are irresponsible with security. And from that point of view, I think that it's correct that we as society hold those people responsible in meaningful ways when they harm the security of people in the populace. And so from that point of view, whether it stifles innovation or not, I think there are trade-offs there that we need to be willing to accept. And there will always be people who ignore regulations, and always be people who maybe innovate in unsafe ways. And I don't think that a regulation in and of itself is going to get rid of those folks either. But I think for those of us who are responsible, I think having a set of parameters and guidelines that we accept we need to stay within in order to not bring harm to society, I think that's a trade-off that, in my view, is worth making.
That's a very good answer, actually, and I agree with 100%. And I do think that I've been working in the software industry for 24 years, even more, but I'm getting old. It's been a bit of a Wild West kind of thing, but
Right.
slowly we're getting it. I don't know if it's regulations, if it's experience, but thankfully we don't have the same type of security issues we used to see in the early 2000s, for example, where it used to be much worse. You could lose much more things and stuff like that, or take down a whole network or stuff like that. So maybe I agree with you. It depends on the timing and everything, but yes, some sort of regulation, and especially in open source. Because I always see open source a bit more of a, while it is very good and it actually drives innovation, but it's also a bit of a anarchy. Oh, I'll just get this library, I'll create a copy and do it my own way, change some things, then redistribute it, and it can become quite dangerous. And it's only fair, especially if you are, as you said, there's a big difference between developing something for yourself and use it for yourself with your own data versus something which you're going to sell or make it publicly available.
Right.
So,
And when you say your own data, again, this harkens back to how much of that data really is your own. Like if you're running a website and people are visiting it, then in some ways you're accepting data, at least at the server level, from all of those folks that are visiting. And to what degree could that information be, disclosed and what harm could that do? Maybe not much. But this is at least I think one of the benefits of regulation like this, even if someone chooses to ignore it, one of the benefits of regulation like this is to at least bring to the forefront the fact that there is responsibility on the part of those who produce digital products to at least think about security. So hopefully it will drive that hopefully it will result in a safer web for all of us by virtue of just that threat, that you could be held responsible for things. And so hopefully people will take it seriously. But hopefully people take security seriously to begin with.
Well, exactly. Yeah,
right. But this does give all of that some teeth, and I think just vibe coding, just in to kind of re-encapsulate the big idea of our conversation today, vibe coding puts responsibility in the hands of people who may not have ever thought about the fact that they would have responsibility in that way. Because if you've never produced software or you've never been closely involved in it, you may not even begin to realize all the ways in which you could cause harm. And so this is why we don't give power tools to 5-year-olds.
Exactly. No, I know, and it's something which I always like to discuss with people, because WordPress is very easy to use, granted, but many people, let's say you own a bakery, you're not a technical person. Right. People don't know what it takes to run a simple e-commerce solution. Now, there's one thing building it, but running it for a number of years, making sure it's secure, making sure there's an uptime, a specific uptime, it takes some experience, and people don't realize that. Yes, it's very easy to spin up a website with WordPress, but it's not easy to maintain a website, because as a baker, or if you're not technical, you cannot even remotely imagine what could happen or what's happening behind the scenes.
And that's the thing, that's a great way to encapsulate it. It's, you don't know what you don't know until you learn it. And so I have a feeling we'll have a lot of folks who are vibe coders who will learn a lot of difficult lessons, and maybe that's going to be good, right? Maybe that's going to be good. I also feel like that there is definitely a place for Gen AI tools in the hands of people who understand code. If it accelerates you and it allows you to experiment in ways that would perhaps take too much time, then in some ways, vibe coding, I think, really can have a tremendous value. But again, those are going to be the folks who understand how to test, how to write unit tests, how to properly QA software, and how to make sure that they're staying, on solid ground, as it were, with respect to the tools that they release into the world. And so those folks I don't worry about as much, unless they get lazy and start trusting the Gen AI tools and circumventing their own accepted practices. Like, you got to treat this as if it came out of the hands of a junior developer.
which is human nature. We tend to get lazy, and in fact, you stole my last question, because I was going to ask you, like, is there a place for vibe coding? But as you clearly highlighted, there is a place, like for everything else. It's just a question of using it responsibly and knowing what's happening. So, and you shouldn't be a cowboy about it, basically.
Yeah, precisely. And I will say, look, at the rate that the models themselves, the LLM models, are improving in quality and in their ability to deliver, better output, I think we'll start to see sort of the obvious issues, like exposing your encryption keys or your API tokens or whatever. I think a lot of those problems are solvable at some level. And so I don't want to sound like a complete, opponent of the whole idea, but again, I just believe that it's so tempting to use something that has so much power and to not comprehend what you don't yet know, that we're going to be in for a little bit of a wild ride here for a while, I think.
Indeed. Thanks a lot, David.
Yes, sir.
Before we conclude, did we miss something? Is there anything you wanted to highlight before?
No, you know what? I'm just grateful to be here with you. I've enjoyed all of our interactions, and so it was great to see you in person. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm honored to be here today. I look forward to our conversations in the future. And we're doing some live streams in the not too distant future of our own. So I'd love to have you in. One thing I'll mention, you might know Thomas Rafe, the founder of We Watch Your Website, is a well-known security researcher. We've got a live stream coming up with him next week. Really excited to talk to him. And this is one of the topics we'll be talking about. He's using what I'll call language models, at least not large ones, but he's got a small language model that is making the web a safer place in a way that maybe none of us would have any reason to know about. So there's some interesting things going on there, and that'll be in connection with SolidWP. So if you've and of course this is why we met. I was product manager for SolidWP, which produces Solid Security. So looking forward to that. That's going to be an interesting conversation next week. And Robert, again, I'm just grateful to be here. Look forward to our future conversations and returning the favor, having you on with us over in the StellarWP world.
Yeah, I gladly come. Thank you. And likewise, I enjoyed everything. Before we close, can you tell people where they can find you, find StellarWP URLs?
Yeah, sure. So visit StellarWP.com. You'll find all of the brands that we have there. And if you want to connect with me personally, I am on Twitter as the David Johnson. It's not because I'm the David Johnson. I'm just the David Johnson you know, right? So you can find me there. I'm on Blue Sky as well, and you're welcome to also hit me up. I have a very outdated website that's in dire need of being updated called thedavidjohnson.com, and so I'd love to connect with you. Love to have you follow me, and of course, if you're on LinkedIn, I'm there as well. So welcome connections, and appreciate again the opportunity.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you everyone for following. Don't forget, of course, to go to next week's live event, which David mentioned as well, because it sounds very interesting. And please like and subscribe. And next week we have a very interesting conversation as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next week. Thanks, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.